The support that we receive from NPPC, whether it's technical advice as we're engaging in these negotiations about your markets and market share and priorities, whether it's your team of veterinarians who can give us great advice and ammunition and information about the work that you do to deal with animal disease issues and help convince other countries about the safety of U.S. pork. We really get a lot of support from all of you. And of course, most recently, your advocacy and your strong voice, both for passage of Trade Promotion Authority and for the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, has been incredibly important. And I think the Secretary was clear in saying that it's easy to be to say no on some of these agreements about all the things that they might do, about concerns about TPA and TPP. It's harder for me as a negotiator to say exactly what those agreements will do because I'm still at the table. And I know that there's going to be a great deal for U.S. agriculture, but if I start talking about what's on the table, that can unravel the deal. You can't negotiate that in the press. So your advocacy about the potential and about your priorities is incredibly important at this time in Washington. So I'm going to echo a lot of the sentiments that you heard from Randy and from the Secretary and try and give you a little bit graphically some of the priorities, what we're seeing in TPP and TPA, and why they're so important. I'm going to leave these slides behind, so you'll have them, and I'm going to give you the links to those fact sheets that the Secretary mentioned, so you can put those in your phone or your iPad or whatever you have with you, so you have them at your fingertips. So just go ahead here. So why are we doing the TPP, and what is it? It's an ambitious 21st century agreement. We're negotiating in the Asia-Pacific Agreement with 11 other countries. 40% of the global economy is at the table, and one of the fastest growing and most dynamic regions of the world. And let's remember that TPP is intended to be a living agreement. It is a platform for other countries to join. So today we have 12 countries at the table, but we already have Korea, the Philippines, Taiwan, Thailand expressing interest in wanting to be part of that group once we get this agreement up and running. So it's designed to create a system of rules for trade and strong market access opening in a region and to expand over time to encompass more of that region. It is a high standard and ambitious deal. It includes strong rules on things like state-owned enterprises, which can make it pretty hard to compete with in some countries in this region. Transparency provisions, so you know how rules are being made that will affect your trade. Regulatory cooperation. SPS barriers have really filled that void. As tariffs come down, some of those SPS barriers have come up. If we can take similar approaches, if we can stress the need for science as the basis for these rules, and this agreement creates rules to do just that, we expand our opportunities. Again, it's major market access into expanding markets. It levels the playing field where others have created agreements all throughout the region, and it's ultimately going to really boost U.S. exports throughout Asia. So again, why are we doing this? 3 key reasons. One is offense. $123.5 billion of additional exports per year from the United States to this country, right? The clear market access gains. 2, defense. Other countries around the region are already forming agreements with each other, and we are not at those tables. If you look just at the Australia-Japan bilateral economic partnership agreement, went into force January 15th of this year. Australia is reaping those benefits. We need to have preferential access in those markets too. And third, let's not forget the strategic and geopolitical reasons behind this deal. This is an economically dynamic area of the world, but it's politically dynamic as well. And there are other big countries, namely China, in that region who want to help set the rules, not just of trade, but to also set rules politically. Economic alliances forge strong political alliances. They are a key part of our influence in the region, and we need to use that influence well. First of all, these are already really important trade partners for us. 40% of our overall exports and 42% of our ag exports are already going there. So even if this agreement, we didn't trade one bit more, by getting rid of tariffs, we get more value and more money in your pockets by every dollar we already send. 4.1 million jobs already supported by what's happening in the TPP region. But, as we said before, this is a fantastically dynamic area of the world. By 2030, 66% of the world's middle class will be in this Asia-Pacific region, and about 60% of the middle class consumption will come from there. And most importantly, what happens when people join the middle class is they change the way they eat. They're no longer worried about just getting enough calories. They're looking at the quality of those calories, which means they eat more protein. And we are very well poised to serve those populations, not only by sending them more dairy, more meats like pork and poultry and beef, but we are poised to be sending them the feed grains to build their own livestock industries as well. So the United States is incredibly well positioned as a middle class grows to be their supplier of choice, and we can do that if we have preferential access. So what we're focused on in the TPP is eliminating or reducing significantly tariff barriers, but those non-tariff barriers as well. Looking at, again, those strong regulatory rules, make sure that rules are based on sound science. The largest gains we expect to see are, of course, in those high-value ag products, meat, dairy, fresh fruits and vegetables, processed foods as well, partly because those tend to be the most protected sectors into ag markets. They have higher tariffs to begin with. When we get them down, we see big gains. But also, again, those changing diets that we mentioned. There's a lot of new opportunity in the region for those products. And we should remember that TPP is an interesting agreement because we have both developed and developing economies at the table. We have the potential for great new access into both Japan, where we sell a lot of very high-value products, a lot of consumer-ready products, and Canada, that has refused to open its market in the U.S.-Canada trade deal, in NAFTA, to dairy, poultry, and eggs, but where we expect them to come to the table and open that market in the TPP. But we also have these dynamic economies, Vietnam and Malaysia, prospective candidates like the Philippines, where we expect to see both a change in growth in volume and in value as those economies develop. For pork and pork products, we expect in 2014 you already sold $4.7 billion worth of product to the TPP countries. And TPP is going to expand that market access to key markets in Japan, Vietnam, and Malaysia. Japan is already, as all of you know, your #1 export market, almost $2 billion a year. But by engaging with them in TPP, we expect to eliminate your tariffs and also to work on better access by working on that gate price system that can make trade with Japan so difficult. In Vietnam, you sent $2.2 million worth of pork and pork products. We could be doing much better by eliminating both the non-tariff and the tariff barriers into Vietnam. This is a country where pork should be their meat of choice. Their population is growing very rapidly, and where we see huge opportunity. And the Malaysian market just reopened in December of this past year to U.S. pork. We were able to get rid of SPS barriers that allow those imports, and we expect to see your market access expand significantly under TPP. And let's remember, again, Randy and the Secretary sort of did my work for me here, but the percentage of U.S. ag exports, or U.S. ag production that is exported, is really phenomenal. That means your income is directly tied, of course, to your market access. And if you look at pork down there, you see, 25% of your product is being exported. This is a critical market for us. But it's true across the entire ag sector. So U.S. agriculture needs to be maintaining and expanding those markets. I mean, if you look at cotton and tree nuts, we're talking well over 80% of their production that goes to overseas partners. So a deal like this is critical for agriculture. And frankly, U.S. market is pretty open. We have some of the lowest tariffs on both agriculture and industrial goods of countries around the globe, but that is not true of the trading partners that are at the table with us. The average ag tariff in Japan is 19%. In Vietnam, it's more than 16%. Our average ag tariff is 5.8%. So, that really is, it's an area where, as we come down together, the relative gain for the United States is much more in terms of the value of that deal. So we're working hard to bring those down. And we have a lot of past success. Randy went through some of this with his great chart, the red and the blue line, looking at how our exports have increased with our trade agreement partners. The orange lines on this graph are the average exports to our trade agreement partners the 5 years before we signed a trade deal, and the blue line are the exports in the 5 years after. And I think if you look towards the right of this graph at South Korea, Colombia, Panama, and the significant growth we've seen there, we don't even have 5 years under our belt. Our tariffs are not at zero on a number of products with those countries, so the potential for a bigger disparity between that orange and that blue continues to exist here. On January 1st of next year, 90% of the pork products going into Korea will be at zero. 64% growth in your exports to that country last year alone. Trade agreements deliver. And now let's talk about Japan, because I've heard a little bit from the pork producers over the past year or so about your concerns about making sure we have good access to Japan. Let's remember, Japan, absolutely, one of the most protected ag markets in the world. High tariffs, difficult TRQs to administer, layers of barriers, a gate price system that's frankly hard to understand and to navigate. But the United States still does really well in Japan, and we should be getting more value out of every dollar we send. Our #1 market for beef, pork, corn, and wheat. Our #2 market for rice and vegetables, #3 for fruit and wine, 4 for soybeans, 6 for dairy and nuts. This is a key partner, and we need to further integrate our ag trade with them. But if you look at the way Japan has approached previous free trade agreements, everywhere you see an X, along the side there, beef, pork, dairy, wheat, rice, and sugar, those are the sacred products Japan talks about, where it wants to protect its markets. All along the top are the current free trade agreement partners of Japan, and everywhere you see an X simply means they refuse to put the product on the table at all. So in almost all of its economic partnership agreements with other countries, Japan just took a pass. We'll integrate our market with you, but not on key products of agriculture. The TPP is really the first time that Japan has agreed to comprehensively put its entire agriculture sector on the table, and it speaks to the value of this agreement, its geopolitical value, what it means to Japan to have a strong alliance in this part of the world, the value of the rules agreements, that this is not just an agreement of convenience where we'll do a little market access, maybe we'll have some agreement on the rules, but a broad agreement for integrating our markets on areas like IP and investment, state-owned enterprises, and transparency. The leverage of the TPP and what it offers allowed them to take this step and put everything on the table. But now that they've done it, Japan has made the TPP part of their full plan. Prime Minister Abe's third arrow in his plan for economic reform and revitalization of Japan is implementing the TPP, implementing agricultural reforms, and moving forward with freer trade. So Japan has taken the steps domestically. They've broken those eggs. They've done the work to say ag has to be on the table. And if we don't do TPP, they'll give those benefits to others to achieve that same reform. They will not wait for us to do what they have now laid the groundwork to do. If you look at those green areas on the map, those are the countries where Japan has already concluded an agreement. All the pink countries are the ones where they're currently negotiating. And the ones with the little blue outline are the ones where they've formed sort of an exploratory committee to start negotiating those trade agreements. So if we don't close the TPP, they'll continue to work bilaterally with the EU. They'll finish their bilateral negotiations and implement them with Canada, and we will be left behind. We need to make sure that our competitiveness does not erode over time. And it's not just Japan. It's around the globe. In 1975, these little lines show where there were regional trade agreements, the RTAs referenced up here. You basically had the EU, you had a customs union in the Caribbean, very little else. By 1995, you see that start to expand. We have NAFTA, we have a trade agreement with Israel, but look at the number of those lines throughout the EU, and starting to see some action within Asia. 2014, here's what you have. Well over 200 trade agreements in the last 10 years in Asia alone. All of those red lines are new agreements that have been added lately, and we're not, frankly, in that many of them, if you look at the number of them, and we're really not in very many of them that head into that Asia-Pacific area, the most dynamic part of the global economy. And it's not like the rest of the world is waiting for us to achieve preferential access to these markets. We have to be part of the game. And frankly, if we don't, we're going to lose ground. Beef is a really great example of where we're losing ground already to TPP countries who are making deals together. In January 15th of this year, as I noted, the Economic Partnership Agreement, what Japan calls its TPAs, with Australia went into effect. Australia today has an 8.5% tariff advantage on beef going into Japan than our beef does. That gap will continue to grow. By 2030, if we fail to get TPP across the finish line, Australian beef will face half the tariff that ours does in that marketplace. So a good sort of graphical example there, but that's across the board on a number of products. And again, those other TPP partners actively negotiating with others, including the EU, one of our key competitors for pork in that region. And let's not forget that strategic and the geopolitical importance. One of the most important foreign policy tools we have is our economic strength and our economic influence, and we need to use it in a way that knits together our allies so that we can stand together. It's going to further that rebalancing to Asia that President Obama announced and that is so critical in foreign policy. And frankly, China's waiting in the wings. It's watching closely what we're doing in TPP. It has offered through the RCEP its proposed trade agreement for the region its own vision. And I think you can guess that there are not the same strong disciplines for the protection of intellectual property. There are not disciplines for standards on labor and environment. They would not discipline state-owned enterprises in an agreement that they put forward. They do not rely, as you all know from your trade experiences, science does not necessarily rule the day for their trade decision-making. So we want to be working with other countries, to be communicating with them on the basis of a set of rules that work for us and for our values as well as our economic interests. We need to set the tone. We need to become that platform that other countries then join. We have a choice. We can lead and we can ensure that our trading system reflects what we need, or we can cede that role, and TPP will be a test of that. So, what is the status? I know you've heard us say that we're in the end game, but it's true. We really are in that end game. We're at the point now where some of the most difficult decisions are the ones that are left, because they're, of course, the ones that always wait until the end, but where countries are actively coming together to look at how they frame those decisions to make those necessary trade-offs at the end of the day. Our goal is to conclude that deal as soon as possible, but it has to be a deal that works for us. We've said all along the substance will drive the timeline. That remains true. We've been working extremely closely with Congress and with stakeholders. Nick can attest to the number of phone calls at strange hours that we have had to work closely with stakeholders on your priorities, but also to make sure we're consulting actively with our colleagues on the Hill to make sure that the TPP negotiating process continues to reflect our priorities and our values. And again, a deal for the sake of a deal is not okay with us. The substance will drive the timeline. But it's going to be hard for us to put that agreement into action without having trade promotion authority in place, without knowing how that deal is going to be considered by Congress. And what is TPA? Randy talked through this a little bit for you, but I want to make sure I reinforce what is this, because I think there's a lot of misinformation by the opponents out there that somehow what fast track means is that an agreement is going to be shoved through Congress. You see this in op-eds and talking points around D.C. these days, that what fast track means is that we're just going to shove an agreement through Congress. They're not going to have time to consider it. No one's going to know what's inside. Well, that's not how this works. What TPA does is it allows Congress to give directions, very specific negotiating objectives that they want me to achieve at the negotiating table in agriculture and other negotiators across the range of issues. They set objectives for us for trade agreements. And then they tell us, you need to talk to us about how you're meeting them. Very specific rules on how we consult with Congress, with stakeholders, how we tell them, this is how we're trying to meet this objective, and we've kind of got some choices here. Here's how others feel about this at the negotiating table. Here's what we think we can achieve. Are we keeping within that mandate that you gave us? I'm on the Hill all the time providing briefings, and so are all of my negotiating colleagues, so that they know how this agreement is being developed. So again, they're defining the terms. What are my goals in the first place? They're checking on my progress, making sure that the trade-offs and the compromises we're making still are going to create a high standard agreement. And then at the end of the day, what they agree is that when I shake hands with my trading partner and say, okay, we're done here, granted, with that consultation piece happening, they're going to agree that that's the package they're going to vote on. They're not going to amend it at the end of the day. There won't be 535 people saying, well, we'd just like a little more chicken and a little less beef over here. I can't close the deal with my counterpart on that way if they don't know that's really the bottom line. So we just ask them to vote yes or no. And at the end of the day, they could frankly vote no. if they don't think we've met those objectives. But throughout the process, they should know how we're doing and where we're going. And as the Secretary noted, at any time, any member of Congress can read the text and see what our progress is. Any member who asks for a briefing, we're happy to provide it. And that's the way we proceeded throughout the negotiation of this deal. So again, it's not a ceding of that authority of the executive branch. In many ways, it's much more hands-on participation in the actual development of rules than I have ever experienced in any policy that I've been in charge of working on or implementing. You know, I was in charge of agreements or of policies at the U.S. Department of Agriculture worth billions and billions of dollars. And the oversight of those programs was not nearly as intense as it has been in developing a policy that isn't even implemented yet. So TPA really is. It's a back and forth process with Congress. And once TPA is granted, it also puts in place a further timeline for consideration of the bill. The President, before he signs that TPP, if we have TPA in place, 90 days notice to Congress. 90 days, and that's 90 legislative working days, which is a lot more than 90 days, to consider and to look at what's in that deal. And then beyond that, you have specific timelines for consideration by both houses before they vote. So again, this really is a two-way street here. It's about fast track is anything but fast, as Ambassador Froman says. It just sets out a series of rules for how we move together, Congress and the administration. So, what are the resources we have for you to talk about why TPA is so important and why TPP is so important to you? Type these in your phone, and I'll go back to them at the end. These are the websites that have fact sheets on U.S. agriculture benefits for trade agreements by state. You can go and see and look at what it means for you, not just for pork, but for other ag products. So overall U.S. ag benefits, TPP state-by-state fact sheets, and why TPA is essential for U.S. agriculture. Use them. Use them widely. Share with people why these things are so important. They need to hear from you. A member of Congress can get 1,200 robocalls with the line that they've been given by some of these groups about why TPA is a bad thing. But one producer in their office talking about what it means to personally to their livelihood is a very powerful message. So thank you for all you've done, and I look forward to working with you as we continue to press for both of these agreements. I just want to give you a little screenshot here. This is what the state-by-state fact sheets look like. I picked Nebraska because that's where I'm from. But it will take you through, again, what's your share of ag exports? What are key products from your state? What are the benefits of TPP for agriculture in each of these states? So this is what you can expect to see.